Hello guys, welcome back. In today's video, we are going to learn all about CSS Box Model. Okay, so CSS Box Model is arguably the crux of CSS. I call it the crux because it is probably the most fundamental, most basic and most important topic for anyone to get started in CSS. I know many people does not start with the CSS Box Model and that is completely fine. But learning the CSS box model is going to be the bridge that you have to cross to stop making websites that is just hacky and start making websites that are more professional. You might have already noticed that I have this image here on the right, which is a screenshot from the Chrome developer tools. This is the CSS box model automatically generated by Chrome, and immediately you can see that there is 4 different boxes here. I have listed them here on the left as you can see. The ones that is inside with the dimension 76 by 76, it is the content box. The content box size is determined by the content, but there are ways around which you will see when we get to the live code. Outside the content box, there is the padding box, which is generated by the padding property. Then there is the border box created by the border property and the margin box created by the margin property. Some people confuse between margin and padding. Padding is part of the element and shares the background color. Margin occurs outside the element and outside the border if there is one, and it does not share anything with the element. One thing to note about margins is that they are actually collapsible. You will get that a bit more when we get to the code, which we are going to right now. Welcome back. You can see that I have already created some boilerplate HTML. Inside the body, I created this div with class 1. You can see the live preview here. I also linked the style sheet, which is empty for now. Before we even begin, I want to show you the box model of element 1. For that, first you have to hover over the element, then right click and go to inspect. Below here you can see the box model. Right now there is only the content box because I have not given any padding, border or margin. The size of the content box is purely determined by the size of the content. To demonstrate that, I will change the font size of the element. You can see that height of the element has changed. The width doesn't change because div is a block level element. Now I am going to add a padding of 10 pixels. You can see that in the box model padding increased by 10 pixels in all directions. One thing to also notice is that the width of the content box has now reduced by 20 pixels. This is because the padding property has taken away 10 pixels each from both sides. The behavior will be same for border and margin because div is a block level element. Now the padding here just becomes an extension of the content. It becomes quite clear when we change the background color. You can see that both the content box and the padding box share the background color. Now let's add a border of 2 pixels. As you guessed it, the 2 pixel gets added to the box model here. It is the same case for the margin. You can see that the 10 pixels have been added to the CSS box model here. If you remember, in the start I mentioned that margins are actually collapsible. What I mean by that is if two elements with a 10 pixel margin is adjacent to each other, the margin between them won't be 20 pixels. Instead, it will be 10 pixels. To show that, I will just replicate this div. Now just click the select tool here and hover over one of the elements. You can see that the margin between them is 10 pixels instead of 20. Now, if one of the elements have a greater margin, it will become the margin between the two elements. To demonstrate that, I will add another class to the second element. Let me also label it 2 instead of 1. On the styles, I will target class 2 and add a margin top of 15 pixels. Remember that the margin top here completely overrides the margin property in the class 1 along the top direction. So there is no 25 pixel margin on the top, there is only 15 pixels. When we hover over, you can see that there is 15 pixel margin between the two elements. This happens because 10 pixels from each side has collapsed on the top of each other. It is very clear when we hover over to the first element. You can see that the first element has a margin bottom of 10 pixels and then the rest 5 pixel is actually blank. It is very important to always keep in mind this collapsing property of margins. The last thing I want to discuss about the box model is being aware of the user agent style sheet and the behavior of width and height properties. By default, width and height of content box is determined by the size of the content. However, you can override that by using width and height properties. I am going to give a width and height of 200 pixels. You can see that the content box has become exactly 200 by 200. This is because the box sizing property by default is content box. It is defined in the browser's default user agent style sheet. But this can be really annoying because you have to recalculate padding and border to make the content fit. To avoid that, we can change the box sizing property to border box. Now the entire element including the border becomes 200 by 200. This makes aligning content far easier. So you generally see the box sizing property with the border box being declared at the top of the style sheet using the universal selector. Talking about user agent style sheets, it also tends to give padding and margin to certain HTML elements. To make it worse, it is different for different browsers. So it is also better to reset margin and padding to 0 in the universal selector. You might have noticed that the two boxes here come closer to the edge of the browser. That is because Chrome by default applies 8 pixel margin to the body which got reset to 0. And that's about it. Like, share and subscribe. God save.